So, Gene, thanks for taking a little time out before this big meeting at 10:15 at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Appreciate it.
Well, since Pete Peterson has always stood for bipartisan cooperation, he must have magically known to time today's meeting with what's happening at the White House today.
Well, share with our audience here, if you can, how this is going to play out. Will President Obama walk into the room at 10:15 and put a plan on the table and suggest to Speaker Boehner, this is my plan, take it or leave it?
I don't think that's the spirit of compromise or cooperation that you'll need to reach the type of bipartisan budget agreement that I think we all know the country needs. I think what you have seen is that the president's laid out, both before the election and since, pretty clear principles, and they're not inconsistent with many of the bipartisan commissions that have spoken on these issues. Lots of difference in the details, but the general idea that you need a balanced approach, and I think balance means at least a couple of things. Mostly that you have a large package that includes both revenues and entitlement savings, and that there's enough to help bring our debt down as a percentage of our economy and put it on a sustainable path. Secondly, that it's fair, that it's progressive, that you're asking those who can contribute the most to contribute to an effort to have shared sacrifice and shared prosperity, and you're doing it in a way that is fair to the middle class and seniors and those who are most vulnerable. And I think there's another important part of the balance, which is that we reach that sweet spot in a 10-year plan where you are both giving confidence that the debt is coming down as a percentage of our economy, but also that you are giving momentum to the recovery right now when we still need more demand, more job creation. And I think those are the type of principles that he is going to talk about. Now, obviously the issue that he's been very clear on is that he does feel that as part of meeting that kind of package, that the very first thing would be great for us to do as a country was come together and extend the middle class tax cuts, the tax relief, extend the tax relief for all those under $250,000 or for income under $250,000. That would take an enormous amount of anxiety out of the economy right now. It would deal with well over half of the fiscal cliff. It would show us working together, give greater certainty and demand to the consumer. And then he's also been very, very clear that he is not going to sign an extension of the Bush tax cuts for income over $250,000. And he does that really for three reasons, because there are three important principles that are part of reaching this overall agreement. One, that you do have enough revenue to be part of a plan that works, that brings the deficit and the debt down as a percentage of our economy. Two, that you lock in the savings. You cannot move forward in this kind of significant budget agreement that's going to call for health reform, entitlement reform, savings, unless you've made clear that you also are going to lock in the revenue that is needed to get a budget agreement. And too often when people have talked about these arrangements, the revenue component is more contingent. It's more based on speculative things that may or may not happen. I think you have to have a framework that locks in those savings. And then the third is that the President very much believes, and has always stated, that he believes that the revenue should be able to come from those over $250,000 as part of a plan that would call for spending cuts and entitlement savings that would be unquestionably broad-based. And so those are the overall principles. And I think, as he has said every single time he has spoken, he's not taking a my way or the highway approach. He's laying out his principles, and he's been very clear he's always open to new ideas that are consistent with those broader principles.
Well, let's talk about where there might be middle ground, where there could be some movement here, because we've seen John Boehner and the President negotiate some of these same issues over the course of the last 2 years without success. What's different this time, and particularly in the area of taxes, the President said he won't accept an extension of the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Could he accept something short of 39.6 for a top rate, for example, yet still have it be an increase, say, over the 35% current rate?
Well, I don't think my goal at this point, an hour before the meeting, is to either add or subtract to what the President said. But understand what's in the president's budget proposal right now. The president's current budget proposal raises $1.56 trillion as part of an overall package of over $4 trillion in savings. It is true that about $950 billion of that come from not extending tax cuts and estate tax relief for those over $250,000. But there is another $500 billion that the president gets in his budget by limiting deductions, limiting tax expenditures or capping them at 28%. What's very interesting is that you hear this discussed everywhere, and you'll hear it discussed later today. What's often not mentioned is that the one person who's put forward a detailed proposal, has for several years, had it scored, been part of the budget, is President Obama. So President Obama reaches his goal, his revenue goal, which is significant. It's probably, it's still not as much as was in the initial Simpson-Bowles framework, so it's not excessive in any way, but it is appropriate for reaching the type of $4 trillion package people are aspiring to. But he does that by both sunsetting those tax cuts for income over $250 and having a tax reform that was limited at 28%. Now, I know that people must not have just seen that, because with all the call for high-income tax expenditure reform, I should be recalling all the applause and support we've gotten for this proposal. But that hasn't quite happened yet. And, of course, that goes to the fact that these are all difficult choices. And even at 28%, there was a bit of resistance. But I do think it shows that the president not only is open to reform ideas, he's included a significant reform idea in his budget, which raises $500 billion over the next 10 years.
I'm going to ask you about the other tough choices because we're short on time already. Entitlement programs. I know you're not going to negotiate it here in front of us, but is this president at least...
I really was ready to, but okay, you're probably right.
All right. I'll give you the opportunity. I'll give you the opportunity. Is this president prepared to move further when it comes to Medicare, specifically, when he sits down at the table with John Boehner, than he was back during the debt ceiling negotiations almost 2 years ago?
Well, you're right. I'm not going to start doing that negotiation. What I would say is that the president, in his budget, put forward, $360 billion in health savings. The president understands that health reform, entitlement reform, is going to be part of this package. He's been very clear about that, and he's made that clear even to those supporters who might prefer to have zero or less Medicare savings as part of an agreement. The president's focus has always been that when you're trying to reduce the degree that Medicare contributes to the deficit, that the best way to do that is to look for things that lower overall health expenditures, as opposed to proposals that simply shift costs. They may lower the federal government spending, but only at the expense of increasing overall health care spending in the private sector and elsewhere. So he's going to be, of course, open to ideas on this issue, but he comes at it with that fundamental principle of the best thing for our economy, the best thing that's both for our economy and for our budget and for Medicare recipients is to come up with solutions that lead to higher value health care delivery at lower cost for the system as a whole, as opposed to cost-shifting proposals.
What would you say to anyone out there who suggests they look at the fiscal cliff, the possibility, again, of these automatic spending cuts, the Bush tax cuts expiring, these other tax provisions, and people who suggest, listen, it's going to be painful, might lead to a possible recession, but at the end of the day, it might actually be better for the country's long-term fiscal future. Is there any notion within the White House that the fiscal cliff isn't that bad?
No. No, I think that would be an economically irresponsible position to take. Our goal is the president's goal is to bring Democrats and Republicans together to do the kind of common ground agreement that will be good for our economy in the short term, help the recovery now, not hurt it, and help confidence in long-term investment in the United States by showing that, one, we can bring our debt down as a percentage of our economy, but also that we can end the dysfunction over fiscal issues in Washington, D.C. Those would have a very positive impact on the short-term and long-term economy. I think to have a strategy that to plot out a strategy to go over the fiscal cliff would be irresponsible. It would hurt millions and millions of middle-class families, tens and tens of millions who would see their taxes go up by $2,000 to $3,000. It would be very harmful for our economy. And I think more than just the technical contraction, what it would do for confidence, how much people would hold up spending. So one can imagine very unfortunate scenarios where that situation is confronted, but it should be no one's goal. All of our goals should be to come together, and that's how the President looks at this. The President has rejected either the idea that your goal is to go over the cliff or that your goal is simply to kick the can down the road. That would not help either. Simply extending all of the deadlines we had would just give people more sense that we will never fix our long-term fiscal problems. So the President feels that the lame duck is a terrible thing to waste, that we need to come together very quickly. And I think people should be somewhat comforted that we are 9 or 10 days after the election, and you've had the President of the United States speak strongly on this issue several times. I think you've had the Speaker make constructive comments, and that they are already sitting down today, just the Friday after the election, to start what we hope will be a constructive engagement that will lead to a solution that not only prevents us from going over the fiscal cliff, but gives people confidence that we're going to take steps to energize and strengthen our recovery in the short term and to surprise people by overcoming our dysfunction to deal with our long-term fiscal challenges.
Surprise people. Your level of confidence that you can share with this audience, the folks watching at home, at the end of these conversations, not necessarily today, at the end of these conversations, there's going to be a deal that puts the country on a fiscal flight path that's sustainable.
Well, you know, as I think the President said, the very first thing that we could do to provide that confidence would be for the Republicans and the Democrats to come together and say, before we even start negotiating the rest of the difficult choices, let's just put into place the thing we all agree on, that we do not believe anyone's taxes under $250,000 should go up because we're not extending the Bush taxes. So the President's made clear, let's start by extending the Bush tax cuts for income under $250,000, give 98% of taxpayers, consumers, the confidence that they're not going to face a tax increase next year. That would be very positive for the economy. It'd be positive in giving confidence that we could work together, and I think it would build greater confidence that we'll work out the rest of our difficult issues. But secondly, I guess I would just say it this way. There is no reason for us not to work out an agreement. The President, yes, has been firm that he will not extend the Bush tax cuts for those making for income over $250,000, but he's also been very clear that he wants a balanced deal, that he understands there's got to be entitlement savings and health savings that are part of the package. He's been very clear about that, and he has said it every time that he has spoken, that he's open to new ideas, that this is never going to be his way or the highway, and that he understands that, as I think he has said many times, compromise cannot be a dirty word if we want to move our country forward in a period of divided government.
All right. Well, Gene Sperling, you have another important meeting over at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with Speaker Boehner. We wish the both of you good luck in your negotiations. Thank you for joining this conversation. And if we could have a round of applause here for Gene Sperling as he heads off to a difficult job. Good to see you, Gene.